All right, David Mills. David, you were the warden here at Brushy Mountain State Prison in Tennessee.
Yes, sir.
You were here. You were warden here twice, right?
Yes, sir.
And you've been warden at how many different prisons
7 different prisons in the state.
in Tennessee? What made you get into the corrections system?
The economy. I needed a job. And, this was a stable job. And I hired in as a guard. And I liked it. Some people ain't cut out for it. But I liked it. And I went up for supervisor position and got promoted. And I ended up going up for another promotion. And the warden sat in on the interviews. And he asked me, he said, why do you want to move up another position? He said, you're still, I was 24 years old at the time. And he said, why do you want to move up? And I said, because I plan on being a warden one of these days. And he said, so you want my job? I said, yes, sir, I want your job. And I went to school at night, and I worked in the daytime. So when I worked at night, I went to school in the daytime. Whatever shift I was on, I went to school on the opposite hours. And I just moved up through the system, and I built a good reputation. And I got offered a job as a warden at a prison that had some problems. It was my first job offer. And over the years, I got known to be the fixer on problems at prisons because I built a reputation of being able to deal with the inmates and the staff. I built respect from staff, and that reputation, got me moved 7 times. Every commissioner I worked for, I asked the last one before he moved me. I said, I've been moved by every commissioner I've worked for. I said, if you don't mind, please don't move me. I'm happy where I'm at. And about 3 months later, he come back and he said, remember what you asked me? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, I need you to go and build this prison in Morgan County. And he said, you've got more experience than anybody we've got. He said, you've been the warden at Brushy, and those people respect you. And he said, it's going to require you to close Brushy when you get the prison built. And that's how I ended up here the second time.
What personality traits do you have that make you a good warden? Or made you
I believe in hard work. Staff knew I believed in hard work. I'd work ever how many hours was necessary. And the staff saw that. If the staff sees you, that you care about it and that you work, they'll follow you. If they see you leaving at 2 o'clock every day and not giving a crap, they ain't gonna follow you. But the staff, the word got out across the state as I moved around that I was a good warden, that I was fair with staff. I didn't put up with no foolishness, but I was fair with staff and treated them good. And my reputation got out ahead of me, and the officers always supported me when I moved. And the convicts I got the reputation with them that if they acted right, I treat them right. But if they didn't, I was as hard as anybody could ever be. I said, you want me to be hard, I'll be hard. And I came close to shooting one inmate, and I did shoot another inmate in a riot that we had at one of the prisons I worked at. And shot him with a shotgun. Shot him in the legs. And he fell to the ground, and they had to pick him up and carry him to the clinic. And we ended the riot real quick. The riot ended real quick after that. And my reputation just got out. I treated him good, but you didn't want to act up. You didn't want to act a fool with me. And that's what inmates, that's the way they'd put it. You know, you don't want to act a fool because Mills ain't going to put up with it. You treat him with respect, he's going to treat you good. But if you act a fool, he's going to treat you as bad as you want to be treated.
You must have some interesting stories from your years working as a warden.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I do.
Are there certain prisoners that stand out, or certain years that were?
There's too many to cover in the time we got, but I'll give you one, and then I'll give you some more. I got reassigned to a prison called Turney Center. It's in Middle Tennessee, and it had problems there. It had a lot of problems, and the warden that was there was a good man, but he couldn't fix the problems. And they moved me there. And my first day on the job, I was taking a tour of the prison. And it was my third prison to work in. And I was taking a tour of the prison, and they called over the radio that they had a stabbing in one of the program buildings. And we went directly to the program building, and the inmate was already dead by the time we got there. And that was my first day on the job. My first day ended up being a murder my first day. But I stayed there for 4 years, and I never had another murder. I never had another assault that even came close to a murder. You know, but it was, I had to show them, you know, and I had to lock the place down a few times, you know, to keep inmates from moving around and restrict their movement and, you know, and do searches and everything else, you know, to keep, you know, weapons out of their hands. But that first day, you know, set the tone of how I was going to have to run that prison.
Are prisons designed to rehabilitate, or are they just punishment?
Some of them are designed to rehabilitate, but some of them are designed for just punishment. And there's some, and the rest of the story is some inmates just aren't designed to be rehabilitated. Some inmates, I can educate him, I can give him a GED, and I can give him a trade, you know, that he can, I can make him an electrician. But if he gets out and he goes right back to the same behavior that he was in before he came to prison, he'll get right back in the same thing, and he'll be back in prison. Some of them just can't be. And some convicts, some of them that I had on death row, some of them that I had in maximum security, some of them that I had in population, just had black hearts, as I called them. And there wasn't, they never deserved to get out of prison. Where they were at was where they needed to spend the rest of their lives.
Why do you think they ended up like that? Was it their upbringing, their childhoods, their parents?
Typically, I would answer that question just very clearly with families. I said, he quit school, didn't he? And they said, yes, he did. And I said, he quit going to church with you when he got a teenager, didn't he? And they said, yes, he did. And I said, he started running with a bad crowd doing drugs, didn't he? And they said, yes, he did. I said, how do you know my son? I said, I don't know your son. I said, but the ones that come usually have the same profile. They've been a problem at home. They end up going to a juvenile facility. They're a problem there. They get out. They run with a bad crowd. And they just end up with different crimes. And the ones that are in for murder, not all of them they've got that black heart that I talked about. Some of them were defending themselves. Some of them were put in position that they felt like they didn't have any choice but to kill somebody. But a lot of them committed horrendous murders. And that's the ones that had the black hearts. And there wasn't nothing you could do to ever change them. They deserved to be in prison the rest of their life. And I had one, and I'll give you one particular inmate. His name was Victor Cos. He was from Louisiana. He broke into a house in Nashville, and he killed 2 old people with a hammer. He beat them in the head until he killed them both, and robbed the house, what he could steal and what money that he could find. And they ended up catching him and convicting him, and he ended up getting a death penalty because it was horrendous, what he did to those old people. And he was on death row in Nashville, and this was my first stint at Brushy. When I was here the first time, there was an officer going around passing out the mail, and they had his tray slot down on his door, and they reached to hand him his mail, and he took a razor blade and he cut that officer's arm from the elbow all the way to his wrist, and cut him deep. And the officer, of course, got help. They dealt with the inmate. They got him out, searched his cell, put him back in there. And the commissioner called me that same day because the inmate told him, he said, the next time somebody sticks their head down here in this cell, I'm going to kill them. He said, I ain't got nothing to lose. He said, I'm going to kill the next SOB that sticks their head down here in my tray slot. And all he was doing was giving him his mail. But that was his point. He said, I've made a point. The next time they're going to be dead. You're going to be picking them up off the floor. So the commissioner called me, told me what had happened, told me that he's a violent, no good SOB. And they sent him, he said, we're sending him to you to put him in your max unit. And they would send a death row inmate to us occasionally up here that caused problems on death row in Nashville because they knew we could handle them in our max unit. And when he got here, he wrote me a letter and told me, he said, I hear that you're a badass warden. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, the first officer that sticks their head down close to my tray slot, and they will slip up, and they will do it, I'm going to kill the son of a bitch. And he said, we'll see how bad you are. And so I pulled my supervisors in. I said, I want you to pull the officers in, and I want you to tell them all. I want you to put a sign on his door. Do not open his tray slot without 2 officers being there. And do not get close. Do not reach down there and get close. You can hand his tray, stick his tray on that tray slot, and make him back up to the back of the cell, lay his tray slot there, and then back up. Let him come pick his tray slot. And if he don't want to do that, he won't eat. And I said, whatever you do, do not let no officer get close to that son of a bitch, because he will kill one of them. He's already proved he will. And so we rocked along. He wrote me another letter. He said, one of these days, he said, I'm going to escape. I'm going to get out of here. He said, and you can't hide. He said, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill your wife. And if you got any kids, I'm going to kill them too. And he said, so you can write that and take it to the bank. And it didn't bother me because I knew he wasn't leaving that max unit. And he had to go out to the hospital one night. because he had a heart murmur. And I sent 4 officers with him. And I told them all, I said, put the taser belt on him, and if he blinks, I said, taser his ass and he'll be on the floor. I said, I don't want none of you hurt. I said, don't take nothing. And I said, if he moves just anything or makes a move towards you, put him on the floor. And they took him and brought him back without incident. He knew not to make a mistake because they was going to end up putting him on the floor. And if he put his hands on one of them, if he got his hands on them through his cuffs, they was going to blow his brains out because they wasn't going to take a chance on getting the officer killed. And so they brought him back, no problem. And about 2 months later, he had one of his spells with his heart in his cell. And when the officer went by, he was laid over on his side, which was unusual. And he called for supervisor to come up there. And they figured out he wasn't putting on. And they called for medical. And they got some extra officers with a shield to go in with him just in case he was playing possum. And medical went in and they checked his all of his vitals, and he had had a massive heart attack and died. And I told him that night, and I told my wife the next day. I said, baby, I said, I'm going to tell you something. I've never said this about a convict, but that convict was burning in hell 5 seconds after he took his last breath because he had a black heart. And I've had quite a few of them that had black hearts, but he was the worst. He was the worst I ever had.
Of the inmates that you've had in your prisons here in Tennessee, just roughly, what are the ratios?
It depends on which prison you go to, Mark. Quite frankly, I said this prison, when it was operating, it was usually about 70% white and about 30% black because they try to keep people in the region where they come from. You know, and the only exception to that was the folks that we had on max. You know, and the ratio in the max unit, it would usually run closer to 50-50 because they were problem children across the state, and they would send them to the what was known to be the hardest prison in the state to do time. They'd send them up here, and but you might go to a prison at Turney Center, for example, and it's in Middle Tennessee. It's about an hour out of Nashville, and it would be 70% black, 30% white. You know, it was just the makeup of where the inmates came from. And there was a higher percentage of black inmates committed out of Nashville than there was white. But it was just that way. But in Knoxville, they usually was pretty even. It was usually pretty 50-50, you know, on the percentage of black versus white.
When a prisoner becomes that, of the mindset you just described,
yeah.
Do you think that's a product of his environment or his family or just a mental disorder, or what do you think it is?
Part of it's the way he was raised. There was something bad happened along the way. Don't know what, but in my opinion, there was something bad happen. You ain't born a killer. You learn to be a killer. And something happened along the way. And something touched him off. And he just become that cold-blooded. And usually they start out with lesser crimes and build up to the murders. And this convict that I was telling you about, he planned on just robbing this house because he had been watching it, and he knew that folks had money that lived there. And when he went in, he wasn't expecting them to be there, and he'd have had him a gun or something, but he had a hammer to get in the front door. And when he went in, they came out, and he ended up killing them both with that hammer. So it's just sometimes the situation that one gets in, like a beer joint fight. Next thing you know, it ends up out in the parking lot, and ends up being some gunplay, and one ends up dead, and one ends up going to prison. It's a situational circumstance in those cases. And you have it all the time. If you watch the news tonight, out of Nashville or out of Knoxville, you'll usually hear that they had a shooting on such and such street. And out of those cases, many times, there's somebody dead that happened. It comes out of it.
And drugs are usually a part of the story, right?
Usually part of the story. That there's drugs behind it. Or they use drugs themselves. May not have been selling drugs, but they may have used them themselves, and they was desperate to get some drugs. So they rob somebody or they kill somebody to get their money, to feed their habit. Drugs is involved in it a lot. A lot.
Tell me about how your years as a warden or as a guard changed you as a man.
I think it made me a better man. That I could see the good in people, but I could also see the evil in people. That part probably wasn't a good trait that I picked up, but I did. I could see the evil in them. And I saw the good in a lot of them. And I think it made me a better man. And it definitely made me a better warden. Every place I moved to, it made me a better warden than the time when I got there. When I left, I was a better warden than I was when I got there. And I learned as I went. And I was lucky that I worked for some good wardens before I made warden. And some of them were jerks. And I knew I didn't want to be like him. And some of them were as good as you could ever ask for to work for. And I knew I wanted to be that kind of person. I wanted to be that kind of warden. And I was blessed to have a good wife that followed me all over this state and helped keep me grounded. And she helped keep me in church, where I probably would have strayed away from it if it hadn't been for her, because of the things that I dealt with and saw it at the prison and the amount of hours I had to work at the prison.
You wrote a book about your experiences.
Yes, sir.
What's the name of the book?
Nature of the Beast.
And this is about your time at Brushy Mountain as well as the other prisons?
Yes, sir. It talks about from the time I hired in as a guard all the way up to the time that I was a warden here. Part of it was from here. And it's some funny stories in it, because there's some shit that you see in a prison that you just can't believe sometimes.
Tell me a story or two about your experiences.
Oh my God. I'm going to get on officers for a minute. We had this officer, and I was a young officer, and they brought this other young officer and told him, they said, you work with Mills, and he'll show you the ropes. And I hadn't been there but about a year. And this old boy, he asked me what to do, and I said, just follow me. And I said, and I'll show you what to do. And there was a lot of noise going on. Well, come time for lights out at 9 o'clock, all the sound went down. The inmates knew you get quiet when the lights go out. And I didn't notice it with all the noise, but he had taps on his boots. And I thought, oh, hell. So it came his turn to make rounds. We took turns making rounds after you got a little experience. It was time for him to make a round on his own. So he went to make a round. And he got about halfway down the cell block. I was watching him. I was at the end of the cell block watching him. And convicts started cussing him. And then all of a sudden I heard a glass breaking. And they were slinging jars they was able to get back then. This was in 1976. And they started throwing jars at the bars to hit him, and was cussing him. And he come flying back up through there, and I barely could hear the taps as he was walking. But when he was coming back, he was going click, 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 click. He was running, and them taps was going off. And I got tickled. I couldn't help but get tickled because it scared the fire out of him. And I called a supervisor and said, we need a supervisor up here. Supervisor came up here and they said, what's the problem, Mills? And I said, ask the officer. And they said, Officer Jones. They said, what's the problem? He said, I went down through there and they got to cussing me. And they threw some jars at me. And he said, glass was flying. And he said, I had to run back off the cell block. And he said, what'd you have to run back off the cell block for? He said, I don't know. And they looked at me and I said, he's got taps on his damn boots. And them taps was waking convicts up. And I said, and they threw a fit. And I said, and that's what run him off. And the supervisor looked at him. He said, why have you got taps on your boots? He said, I just like to hear the way they sound. He said, well, you just sit right there. I'll be right back. So supervisor left, and he stayed gone about 10 minutes. He come back, and he gave him some pliers and a screwdriver. He said, you take those taps off those boots. And he said, and stick them in your pocket or throw them in the garbage. I really don't give a damn. He said, but you ain't going to last at this prison very long with that kind of attitude. He said that you didn't have enough common sense to know I'm going to walk down on night shift and go down the cell block with taps going off. So anyway, that's a funny story with the officer, but with inmates, they would just do foolish things. I looked up one day, I was shift supervisor before I made associate warden, and I was sitting at the operations desk that faced the breezeway where you walk through, and inmates could come by and talk to you about their problems because we didn't have very many counselors back in those days. And inmate walked up, and I was looking down at the paperwork on my desk, and I looked up, and this convict had bright red lipstick on and had some, I don't know where he got them, but he had some bright red leggings that he had got from some damn place, and he had them on, and he had some, this was before we put the inmates back in stripes. They were in stripes, and they took them out of stripes during a liberal period and let them wear any kind of jeans they had. And he had them jeans as tight as you could get and had them leggings on and had that red lipstick. And his nickname was Juicy. I looked up and I saw him like that, and I said, Juicy, I said, what in the hell have you got on? And he said, Mr. Mills, said, Lieutenant, said, a girl's got to look as girl can look. and said, I can't just walk around here just looking like anything. I said, well, one thing's gonna happen. You ain't gonna walk around like that. And I said, you go to your cell, and I said, you get that lipstick, and you bring it back to me, and hand it to me through this window. And I said, when you come back, you bring me them leggings too. I said, you bring me them leggings, and you bring me that lipstick. And I said, and when you come back, I said, be prepared to tell me where you got it at. And he looked at me and he said, now, Lieutenant, now you know a girl can't tell everything they know. And I said, what you don't understand is you ain't no girl. Don't be talking to me that way, Lieutenant. I said, I'm talking to you that way. I said, go get the stuff. And when you come back, we'll have some more talk about where you got that crap from. And sure enough, that was the way he walked all the way off his cell block, and not no officer had stopped him. You know, he just walked off like that. And the officers, they were so used to seeing crazy stuff, he just walked on out. You know, and it was that kind of stuff all the time. You'd go to the yard and you'd look up, and there'd be a couple of folks walking together, and they'd have their jeans cut off, you know, as short as they could get them cut off, you know, and had their shirts cut off and top. And they were, both of them were obviously gay, and they was walking, and you'd stop them and said, what do you think you're doing? And they said, girls have got to get their exercise. And I said, no, girls have got to get back to their cell, and they got to get them shorts off, and they got to get that shirt off. And I said, if they're seen again, they're going to get rolled up and locked up and put in max. I said, because somebody's going to end up killing one of y'all, or they're going to kill each other over y'all. I said, because that's what creates lots of trouble. You know, is fighting over each other.
Tell me about the cells. So Brushy Mountain is now closed.
Brushy Mountain's now closed.
It closed a few years ago?
Been closed since 2009.
And the cells behind you are very small. How many inmates do they hold?
They typically hold 2. But when the department was at its worst, in the early 70s, up until 1979, the prisons were overcrowded real bad. And they added 2 extra bunks in every cell. So there was 4 men in a cell, 4 bunks in every cell here.
That's awfully crowded.
Yeah, it was crowded. It was real crowded. And what they usually did was they tried to schedule the inmates on their jobs where there was only 2 at a time in a cell. You know, like at night, there'd be 2 workers in the kitchen working in food service, while the other 2 was in the cell, and they might be working in the coal mine the next day. So they wasn't all in there at the same time.
Did you ever have, I'm sure you had some inmates try to escape?
Oh, yeah. I've had some successful escapes.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And you don't want to have a successful escape.
No, you don't.
But regretfully, I've had a few successful ones.
How did they escape?
Well, I had one caught. It was real foggy one night, and he had been scoping out, you know, the fog, how it rolled in. And he checked out the place that he wanted to, that he knew he could climb the fence, where the 2 fences came together. And he laid down that night when they shut down the yard. It was right at almost before dark. They closed the yard. And there was a washout where one of the culverts brought storm drain out. He laid down there until after it got dark. and until that fog rolled in. And he climbed that corner where those two fences came together and throwed his coat over the razor wire, and he went right over the top of that razor wire because his coat was what was catching the thing. He was blessed that he didn't end up getting caught in that razor wire himself. But he ended up getting away. He got away that night. But before it was over with, we ended up catching him a few days later because it was in the wintertime. And it was in late fall when he was had cold nights. And we didn't get any sightings or anything. So we kept our dog teams ready and had people stationed in different places. And he ended up, he had to have gotten hungry, and we knew he had to be getting hungry. And he showed up at a little store that was down from the prison, maybe 5 miles from the prison. And he went in, and he had $25 or $30 on him that he got before he escaped. And he went in and got him something to drink and got him something to eat. And the store owner knew that there was an inmate out on escape because they had stopped, the officers had stopped and warned him and told him. As soon as he went back out the door, the store owner called the prison, and he said, your escapee just left the front door of my store. And they called on the radio and moved in to where he was at and didn't see him initially and drove around. And they caught him. He was trying to get to the trees to get out of sight, but they saw him before he got to the trees down from the store. And we got him, brought him back. But you ain't always that lucky. Every once in a while, one beats you. He's got his plan. And I've lost a couple that they had a car waiting on them when they escaped. And the car picked them up, and they was out of state before you ever even knew they was gone. So occasionally you get beat. But hopefully, if you got good security in place, hopefully you avoid most of those cases. I hadn't had a successful escape in about 10 years before I retired. And I've been retired since 2011.
Brushy Mountain opened in what year?
1896.
1896.
When it first opened, they built it. The inmates, they brought some inmates in here on a train, and they unloaded them and had some tents and had some guards watching them. And the inmates built some barracks out of wood, and that's what they lived in. And they started working in coal mines. And it caused some bad blood in the area because there was lots of coal mines that operated, and with people that were, that's what they did for a living. And they brought these convicts in and was working them in the coal mine, and they saw them as competition. But they didn't cause no problem. They left them alone. And eventually, the inmates, they used them. If you look around the outside walls, they used the inmates to build the prison. Because they had the barracks to live in. And they worked on building the prison with inmate labor. And, they cut the stone out of the mountain, out of the rock quarry. They cut the stone out for the walls. And they bought the blocks and brought the blocks in and made the cell blocks, and they did all the work. convicts did every bit of the work.
And now since Brushy Mountain is closed, it's being turned into a resort or a...
Well, no, it's not a resort, but it's close to it. They started out creating a museum, and there's a museum operates here. But the Chamber of Commerce, the county asked the state to turn the prison over to the county. And the state had no problem with it because they couldn't do anything with it. It was just a big white elephant to the state. And the county wanted it. And they were hoping that they could get somebody to operate something up here to keep it open, to keep it useful. And they turned it over to the Chamber of Commerce. And the chamber put feelers out, and they got a fellow that owns a restaurant in Chattanooga, came up and looked at it, and he just had a vision of what it would turn into. And now he's got a restaurant that he operates. He has tours he operates all day long from April the 1st until the end of October. They run tours all day long and charge so much for the tours.
So back to your years here. Were
Yes.
there any particular prisoners that were memorable?
There were several. There was an inmate named Billy Rice, if I'm not mistaken, was his last name, or Billy something to that effect. He was in his late 60s, and he had been in prison his whole life. Every time he'd come close to getting to meet the parole board, he'd end up killing somebody. And he'd killed 5 or 6 inmates in his career. And he just was known to not put up with no crap. He was respectful to staff, super respectful to staff. If they told him to do something, he did it. But if an inmate tried to take anything that belonged to him, he wouldn't just fight with them, he'd kill them, because he wasn't a big fellow. He was just a medium-sized guy, probably weighed 160, 70 pounds. And he had a reputation for killing folks. And some of them didn't want to believe it. They thought he was an old man. He can't do it no more. Well, he still could do it. But he built some good time when he wasn't in lockup. You let him out in population, just sure as the world somebody was going to try him, and sure as the world he'd end up killing somebody. So you had to keep him in max all the time. And he was just as respectful as you could be, no problem to staff. But he just could not live in population because somebody was going to try him.
After all your years in the prison system, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned from all of this?
Treat them all the same. Treat them right. You treat them right, and you treat your staff right. And the staff is going to back you up. And if the staff backs you up, the inmates know it. And if you treat the inmates right, they're going to act right. And when one acts out, you got to deal with him. And if that means locking him up and keeping him locked up for 6 months, then that's what it takes, to get his attention. And a lot of them, it gets their attention, but some of them, it don't.
And locked up means like solitary confinement?
Solitary confinement, yes, sir. I spent 36 years in corrections in this state, and I saw a lot of change.
Have things improved?
Yes, they've improved. They've improved.
In what ways have they changed?
There's more programs now for inmates. If an inmate wants to do better, and when he gets out, there's more programs available for him. everything from Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, more counseling available than there was, more mental health counseling, because a lot of them got mental health problems. You know, a lot of them come to us with mental health problems because they wasn't dealt with on the street. And we've got more mental health staff. So it's got better as far as us managing inmates. You know, you still have problems. And you still have some of them that's going to act out. And you still got some of them that's going to assault staff. But the majority of them, it's better for them than it's ever been, probably.
All right. David Mills, thank you so much for sharing your experiences here at Brushy Mountain.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.